So hi, welcome to Anchor Reviews on episode after the credits on Anchor Reviews. This is Tyler from Anchor Reviews, and this is my review on The Batman. I just watched this movie recently and I just got back from watching it, and it was kind of meta because there's a lot of rain in the movie and it was raining and really windy when I got out of the theater, so I could really relate to what was happening in the movie in that sense. But anyway, so The Batman is yet another reboot in the Batman franchise, which, is probably going to happen until the end of time, but I digress. So The Batman follows Robert Pattinson as Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, fighting crime in his second year of crime fighting. However, he has to investigate a serial killer known as the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, and the mystery exposes all the corruption in Gotham City. Now, I did hear a lot of people complain about this movie by saying that, oh, it's too dark, it's not the right movie for the time, but in actuality, I have to go against that because I think this movie is kind of holding up a mirror to what's going on right now, because when The Dark Knight came out, that movie came out the same summer as the recession happened, so that was very fitting for the time, and everything that's been happening in recent years, I think a dark movie like this one is very fitting. So the thing is that it kind of reminds me of another movie I watched not too long ago called The King's Man. So The King's Man, with that movie, I liked the second half of that movie, but I didn't like the first half. With The Batman, it was kind of the opposite, where I liked the first half of the movie, but not necessarily the second half, and there are various reasons why, so it's going to be mild spoilers from here on out, just keep that in mind. And it's kind of hard to review this movie without spoiling stuff. But anyway, so I liked the first half because I really love the visual look of this movie. It reminds me of when you go outside at nighttime, you see those street lights, and it just is a very gritty movie. I just love how this version of Gotham City feels like its own character, unlike in the Nolan movies where most of them were just stock footage of New York City or Chicago. This one had its own unique personality. I also really love the noir aspect of this movie, where Batman sometimes would narrate like a detective, just like how he would narrate in the comics and some of the other animated movies. So I love the fact this was more of a mystery and emphasizes Batman as a detective, which a lot of live action Batman movies kind of skim over that. So I was really happy finding out and watching this movie, seeing Batman's detective skills being shown. I also like some of the other supporting cast members. I really liked, of course, Colin Farrell as the Penguin in this movie, and I'll be shocked at whoever did the makeup effects for this movie doesn't get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Makeup, because he was virtually unrecognizable in this movie. And what's ironic about Colin Farrell being in this movie was that he was considered to play Batman back in the early 2000s during that hiatus between Batman Robin and Batman Begins, where Warner Brothers was thinking about what do we do with the Batman franchise now. So as for the character of the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, I liked this version of the Riddler because he wasn't just the, kooky, I'm chewing up the scenery, like, oh, laughing, like, Jim Carrey was in Batman Forever. But I was also getting the vibe, like, it's definitely someone who is kind of like someone on social media, especially when he's like live streaming. It was kind of like Instagram, and when I saw this in theaters with a packed crowd, some people laughed when that happened, and I don't know if that was how intentional that was and supposed to be funny or dark humor, or maybe they thought that was going to be edgy, but just the whole like showing all the hearts going up like an Instagram live video it kind of took me out of the moment just a little bit in the wrong way. The thing is that I think the second half of the movie kind of gets iffy for me because, part of it was kind of the length. It is the longest Batman movie ever made at close to 3 hours long, and sometimes I could kind of feel the length of this movie. It wasn't as much of a drag as Dark Knight Rises was, but at the same time, there are moments where I'm like, yeah, they probably could have streamlined a few things to get to the point faster. And also, with Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, well, she's technically just called Selena Kyle, but she does have the Catwoman costume on. I like the costume she had on, and especially the mask reminded me of the Selena Kyle mask from Batman Year One, the kind of the early Catwoman mask, and the bodysuit was very comic book accurate too. And Kravitz, I think I have to put more thoughts into what I thought of her as her acting or taking the character. I think she did a solid job wise, except for this really cringe line of dialogue she says to Batman on the roof. And I'm not really going to go into too much details about it, but you probably see online as kind of a pretty cringe and woke moment, and it's going to be pretty outdated, like the line that Robert Downey Jr. character has in the first Iron Man movie when he brings up MySpace. But the other thing to mention is that the third act of the movie, the climax, climax, what happens, I felt like it was really not as grand as it could have been. And there's a part too where Batman injects himself with some kind of like adrenaline drug. And the problem with that scene is that it was never really established earlier in the movie that he had that. There's a saying called Javaski's gun, or I'm trying exactly what you call it exactly, but it's a screenwriting rule where if you're going to have a character have something important or do something important in this later in the story, then you should establish that they have such a thing beforehand. And I think the problem was that they forgot to emphasize that or establish that Batman had this kind of gadget. So when it happens, it just felt like a plot convenience and kind of reminded me of the Adam West Batman a little bit when he had, whatever convenient thing he had from his utility belt to get him out of jam, even though it was never established. But of course, I did forget to mention Robert Pattinson as Batman, and he was a pretty solid Batman, I guess. I really loved the dark tone of this character, and Robert Pattinson is just a good actor. I've seen him in other movies, such as Lighthouse and Tenant and various other projects he's been in too, and he's shown that Twilight doesn't really define his career, that he is a talented actor, and I liked him in this movie. I liked the grim tone he had in his voice, as well as when he's like Bruce Wayne, how he was just a recluse throughout. And I also thought that Andy Serkis was pretty solid as Alfred as well. So anyway, as for the Batman, I think it's a fairly solid Batman movie. I think it's better than the majority of live action Batman movies, but I definitely prefer some of the Nolan movies and even the Tim Burton Batman movies. I kind of prefer more over that one. And of course, Mask of the Phantasm for me is the gold standard when it comes to Batman movies. And in addition to that, I would say the length and some woke stuff about it, and also kind of the third act in a way, kind of held this movie down from being great. It's the issues I had with the second half of the movie, but I really liked the first half of this movie a lot. So as for the Batman, I would give it about 3 stars out of 4. So anyway, this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of After the Credits on Anchor Reviews, and I hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe.